it's Elizabeth from elizabethclaire.com, and today I'm sharing part 2 of the PreCana talk that my husband and I do. So I will link part 1 down below, but this is part 2, and I really think you should watch part 1 first because it's going to give you a little bit of heads up about our marriage, because our talk is essentially, it's a testimony and about what we learned through the grace of God in our marriage. So this is part 2. So we've been talking about the keys of a successful Christian marriage, and let's see if I can remember them. Key 1 is commitment, and key number 2 is forgiveness. Key number 3 is self-awareness, and key number 4 is rooting out sin and growing in virtue. So today we're going to talk about key number 5, which is openness to life. So 2 months after we got married, and if you watched part 1, you know that we got married with 1 semester of our school left to go. So 2 months after we get married, and I was still in college, we found out we were expecting our first child. So this was not exactly what we had envisioned for our first year of marriage, but we were willing to accept whatever God's plan was for us. We just hadn't really discussed it a lot or planned a lot, or I guess we were just taken by surprise. So anyway, having that baby, expecting that baby, and then bringing that baby into the world brought on a lot more disagreements about our faith. Like, will the baby be baptized? I shared in video 1 that I was raised Protestant, and I essentially had the mindset when we got married that any Christian faith other than the Catholic Church was fine. And my husband was raised in a very strong Catholic family. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic, and I don't quite know how we ended up getting married, but we did. And I often wonder what would have happened if I would have understood the gravity of that issue, but God really did work it out. So anyway, having this baby brought on more disagreements about our faith, like the baptism issue. There's a story from when we went on our honeymoon. We drove up to Lake Superior, and I don't know why we had never discussed this before, and maybe we had and we just never came to a conclusion, and so it just got brushed off. But I vividly remember talking about children, the possibility of having children, and where our family would go to church. And I told my husband, well, we will go to whatever non-Catholic church we like best. And my husband was really floored by that. He couldn't believe that. I just believed that any theology other than Catholicism was right, but that was really my mentality. It was not the best way to start off our honeymoon. I'll say that. So the baby changed the direction of our life, especially mine. So our son required a lot of self-sacrifice of me that I was not used to. I was the baby of our family by 5 years, so I was not used to that sort of self-sacrifice. I ended up staying at home versus attending graduate school like I had planned. I was a biology undergrad at a time. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a high school biology teacher, and then I had made the decision that I wanted to go to physician assistant school, and I had applied, and they called one day and offered me an interview, and I had to say, no, I am going to have a baby, and I need to be at home with my baby. I knew that going to school and having a young child at home was just not a wise choice for us. So that is a decision that everyone needs to wrestle with in life. So I want to talk to you as non-judgmental as I can about this. I'm sad that there's so many mommy wars going on, but I think there are mommy wars going on because this decision is of supreme importance. I know that there are women who need to work to help their families financially through hard times, but I hope that those are the exception and not the rule. And unfortunately, I think in today's society, it has become the rule for the woman to work and to be a provider. So this is something that we all have to wrestle with. And I just want to encourage you to bring it to God, give it lots of thought and consideration, lots of prayer. Just cover that decision in prayer And use that self-awareness that we were talking about. Is it really essential that you go to work so that your family survives? Be completely honest with yourself. And remember that your child is an eternal soul. Your child is an eternal soul. Let that sink in for a little bit. So how you raise them is of such importance. Okay, you don't get a do-over. You don't get to go back. And it's so important that we do it right. And I think that God gives us the grace. If we need to work, God will give us special graces. But we have to know that that's what his will is for us. And so that takes prayer and thought and consideration and discernment. So looking back now, 12 years later, and even a few years after our son was born, I realized what an immense blessing that untimed, unplanned, and untimed pregnancy was. It allowed me to stay at home and have more time to read and develop myself as a person and as a mother and as a wife, which eventually led our family to greater happiness and myself to greater happiness as well. So I think it's really important that we know that God's plan is always greater than our own. There are abundant blessings with each new child, and each new child brings us closer to each other as a husband and wife. You know, I never feel closer to my husband than 5 minutes after the baby is born and we're sitting there in the hospital. My gut still looks like I'm 5 months pregnant. I'm 30 pounds overweight. I look awful, but we have this new little life. I never feel closer to him than in that moment. So it is such a blessing. I just wish everyone knew what a blessing it was to have children. So maybe you're going to have a surprise blessing in your marriage, but regardless of how children come to you, it should always be a prayer point, a point of prayer, always opening yourself to whatever God's will is for your family. And later we would decide it was not the right time to bring children into the world. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And it was not the decision I wanted to make, but it was what we needed to do at that point. So I just want to challenge you all to accept God's plan joyfully, whatever that is. And remember the Bible verse that he works all things for good. So at this point, my husband talks about having the right order of priorities. And he talks specifically to men, and I think women can have the same thing, that we have to make that switch from being a single person and then being married, where we need to make our husband or our wife a priority, and then when there are children that come in. So I think men can struggle with hobbies like fixing cars or going hunting and letting that time take away from their families. Women can want to go shopping or spending time with their friends or being on the phone with people, whatever it is, or maybe it's Facebook, or unfortunately there's so much trying to vie for our attention right now. And we just need to be honest, using that self-awareness again, and just being aware of what God would want our priorities to be. And eventually, I think God, even though it can be hard to change the way our priorities are lived, eventually God makes it easier for us, and he gives us the grace to do that. So at this point in our marriage, if I had to characterize what our relationship was with God, it was that we had faith, and but we didn't necessarily have a love of God. So God was something that united us, but he was something that just drove us apart a lot those first 4 or 5 years of our marriage. So we had tried on our own a lot. We had tried to prove our religion to each other, which never ended well. We visited lots of different churches. We went church hopping to try to find nice churches, and usually the frustration that caused ended up in us not going to church for long periods of time, because it was just such a frustrating and emotional experience. So for me, when we would go to the Catholic Church, I had to learn the pew shuffle because I couldn't receive communion with my husband. we'd been married 4 years and I could not receive communion with my husband. And I had to know how to get out of, I was always sizing up the situation when it was communion time, how I was going to get out of the pew and then let the people behind me go, and then how I was going to be able to get back in to sit by my husband. So I almost always cried during communion at the Catholic churches that we would visit. Then I would take my husband to a Protestant church. It didn't necessarily have to be Presbyterian, though I was raised Presbyterian. And he would get frustrated because I was okay with anything that wasn't Catholic. And even though they had open communion, he wouldn't go up and receive it. It was so frustrating. And at this, around hitting that 4-year mark, that struggle became really frustrating for us. Hey everyone, so sorry I had to switch to my webcam because I have this cheap little phone and it just doesn't hold enough storage space, so I'm sorry about this breakup. Okay, so getting back to our story here. So we struggled with bringing more children into the world, even though we really wanted to, because of our faith differences. And we wondered what we reflected about Christ to our son. And our first remained unbaptized. And my husband, his parents, God bless them, would send us emails or talk to him on the phone about having our son baptized. And that just was such a frustration for me that I felt like they were getting their noses into our business. I understand now the hearts that they had, and I appreciate that they made that effort, but at the time it was really hard for me. Our son was now 3 at this point, and we really wanted for him to have a sibling, but it just did not feel like the right time. So this brings me to key number 7, which is having a personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is really the most important key. Unfortunately, we didn't discover these keys in order, and if we had discovered this one first of all, it would have made those first few years of marriage so much easier. So what brought us to this point, at least for me, was a very untimely family death. My uncle had passed away, and going to his funeral, I saw that his family had this hope that something good would come out of this sad thing, this very unexpected thing that had happened. And they had such hope, and I learned about my uncle and how he, every morning before he would go to work, he would read the Bible and he would say a prayer. I can't say it as eloquently as his words would have been, but it was, Lord, use me to share your love and help me to touch somebody today, basically. And I was really touched by that at his funeral. So when I came home from that funeral, I was really inspired to pick up the scriptures again. I had read the scriptures when I was younger, but I had kind of let them go, especially in the frustration that I had experienced in our marriage. So I picked them up and I began voraciously digesting the scriptures. And reading those, I was so educated by God and how to be a better wife and all that self-awareness and those rooting out of sin. Now I had the Bible to strengthen me in that, and prayer time with the Lord to help with those graces that I needed to make that change and to really feel like God was on my side in that. Around the same time, I read the book The Case for Faith. It is written by a journalist, a former atheist named Lee Strobel. And in this book, he dissects arguments against the existence of God or Jesus or religion, the Christian faith, really. And as I read that, while I'd been reading the Bible, it still seemed, and I accepted the Bible, it still seemed far off. But in reading The Case for Faith, I realized, oh my gosh, God is real. Jesus is real. And if Jesus is real, that changes everything. You have to give your entire life to him. There is no in between. You have to give everything over to God. So I did give my entire life to God. And God really honors this intent. And I began seeing myself change and grow tremendously and a lot more quickly than I had on my own. I saw lots of big changes at this point in my life. During this time, we began to learn to rely on God even more. My husband nearly lost his job. His workplace laid off more than a third of their workers during the recession of 2009, and it happened very shortly after we had purchased this house. And as a young couple, that was a pretty stressful situation, and I really learned to lean on God as a provider. His income had also been cut, and as a single income family, that was hard. I know we didn't struggle as much as some other people did, but I still learned to lean on God as a provider. So in learning and developing my relationship with Jesus, I developed this burning desire and understanding that God wanted us to be united in our marriage. And God put this peace in my heart that He wanted that for us. And if I really brought it to Him in prayer, instead of trying to prove my religion to my husband and argue about my religion, that He was going to solve the problem for us. So I told God, I said, God, I will do whatever it takes. I remember vividly sitting out on our porch after praying lots and lots and lots, and just having there was always this knot inside of us. My husband and I both talk about this. We were so happy, and yet there was this friction on the inside. And I remember praying out on our porch one morning and just bringing it to God and saying, God, I will do whatever it takes. And then I whispered very quietly, hoping God would not hear me, even if it means joining the Catholic Church. Very, very half-heartedly. Okay, I felt like I had to make a deal with God. Yes, I was growing in my relationship with God, but I wasn't saying I was super mature with my relationship with God, right? So I said that very half-heartedly. And in saying that prayer, I experienced this tremendous peace right after saying that prayer, that God was going to do something, and He was going to do something really big. So I was really excited to see what happened. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. My husband at this point in our PreCana talk talks a lot about his own conversion to God. He, when we moved to this home, we moved to a different town just 10 miles down the road. It's a very little town, less than 1,000 people. And like I had said before, our church attendance had been really spotty because it was so frustrating. And when we moved to this town, I grew up in a family that went to church every single Sunday. Every single Sunday. We were Presbyterian, we were Protestant. Every single Sunday we were there. Every single Sunday I was at at Sunday school. And so when we moved to this town, I just hated having that piece missing from my life. And I said, I'm going to go to church. You don't have to go with me, but I'm going to go. So I would go to the Methodist church. And then eventually my husband, he really wanted to go to the Catholic Church, but we wanted to attend church as a family. We wanted to be united for our son. And was our crazy arrangement. We would, one Sunday we would go to the Methodist church together with our son, and then later in the day my husband would go to the Catholic Church by himself. The next Sunday I would go to the Methodist church by myself, and then we would go to the Catholic Church together as a family. And it was this crazy arrangement, but it was a step in the right direction, right? So my husband started growing closer to God too, and he started reading, and he started listening to debates and apologetics, and he would make me listen to those apologetic debates, and I just got mad because it seemed like the Catholics actually had good answers to stuff. But he began to change too, and so he had this conversion experience. Like I said, we were Christians before, but he had this deeper conversion and a deeper surrender to the Lord. So we really didn't argue in our marriage, but religion was the hot button issue. Okay, our son, we had this crazy arrangement, and our son started asking on Sunday mornings, are we going to the mommy church or the daddy church this Sunday? And that broke my heart. Okay? So within 2 weeks of uttering that prayer, God, I'll do whatever it takes, even if it means joining the Catholic Church. I remember vividly being out in the garage with my husband, and he was standing at the workbench, and he was strangely silent, so I knew something was bothering him. And lo and behold, after lots of poking and prodding, which I'm really good at, he revealed that it was this religion difference. I think he'd been bothered by his family again to baptize our oldest child. And I was so mad, and old Elizabeth popped up again. And I just kind of stood up. I was sitting on the steps into our house, and I stood up and I stomped my foot and I said, fine then, I guess I'm just going to have to join the Catholic Church, aren't I? And I stormed out of the garage and I went upstairs to our bedroom. I laid down on our bed, and I had planned on having a pity party. But I didn't have a pity party. I realized I had that crazy peace was back. And it was like God was saying, I felt like he was telling me. In fact, if I've ever heard God speak to me, that was the strongest moment I've ever heard God speak to me. He said, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. And I thought, God, don't you know they worship idols? They worship Mary, and they do all kinds of evil things, and that's against my conscience, God. I can't do that. I would have done it long ago, but it's against my conscience. And he said, just trust me. That's what you're supposed to do. So I knew enough at this point that that is what I needed to do, and if I didn't do what God told me to do, then I was going to be hearing from God for a long time until I did what he told me, right? I don't know if you've ever had God tell you something, but he will bug you until you do it. So later I told my husband about that, and he didn't believe me. The next day I called RCIA, which if you don't know what that is, it's the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, which is the way that you join the classes you attend and the process you go through as you join the Catholic Church. And I called them up and I said, hey, I want to join the Catholic Church. I got myself signed up. I still don't think he believed me. My husband believed me. But that same week I went to a local library in a bigger town that has a lot more books. And I checked out every single book I could get my hands on Catholicism. I checked out 30 books. My bag was stuffed. And you know what? I read every stinking book. And I didn't know what God... I was not going to do something against my conscience, but God was calling me to go down this path. So I went down that path. And as I read, I learned so much. I began to believe that, yes, God instituted the Catholic Church to propagate the faith. And they are the ones that have held to the truth. And I was just amazed, and it was just such a miracle. So after a year of preparation, I received communion with my husband for the very first time. And a week later, our first son, as well as his 3-week-old baby brother, were baptized into the Catholic faith. Sorry, that was such a special time for our family. It was such a blessing. If any of you are in a divided marriage or are dating someone of a different Christian faith, oh, I get it. I understand that tension and that frustration, and my heart just goes out to you, and I so want your marriage or your relationship to be united too, just like ours was. It was just such a blessing. And that's key number 8, is growing in unity of faith. And I just want to encourage you, if you are in the boat that we were, to seek God, to seek his truth and pray. Don't seek being right and proving your faith. That's not going to get you anywhere. But I just want to encourage you to just chase God. Learn about God together. Read the Bible. Learn about each other's faith. And God's going to lead you home, wherever home is, his truth. And obviously I'm Catholic, so that's where I believe the truth lies now. I would not have joined the Catholic Church just to satisfy our marriage and my husband. It was totally against my conscience to do that. And so God really spoke to me, and he changed my view on the Catholic Church, and I saw it as something different. So if you are the person that's outside the Catholic Church, I want you to openly investigate it with an open mind and an open heart and lots of prayer. So if this is before your marriage, I just want to really encourage you to resolve your issues before marriage. It's just going to make those years so much easier and so much more joyful. My husband and I have so much more joy in our life right now because of being united in faith. And even now that we're united, we continue to grow in Christ. We love to read religious books together, watch religious things on the computer. We can't, with our young family, we can't attend a lot of conferences, so we love watching these conferences that are on the internet. The internet can be such a great thing. So we learn a lot, and we're strengthened, and it always gives us lots of great food for thought. So just seek truth and ask God to show you the way in your marriage, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever your circumstances are. And please remember the Bible verse that says, a cord of three strands is not easily broken. A strong faith together will make your marriage very strong and last to eternity. I thank you so much for listening. If you've listened this far, God bless you, and may God's blessings and peace just be on you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.